Hello everyone. Now, the previous lectures in the series after the introduction focused on Aristotle's virtue ethics and Mill's utilitarianism. The focus of today's lecture is going to be on Kant's deontological ethics. Now, as you may recall from your second video, which was on Aristotle, so Aristotle wrote somewhere in the 4th century BC, and Kant is writing his treatises on ethics in the late 18th century, which is the age of enlightenment. So basically somewhere more than 2000 years have passed between these two giants of philosophy, and many significant thinkers have come in between. So from Aristotle himself and Epicurus to the thinkers of the medieval philosophy such as Augustine, Aquinas, William of Ockham, and those from the Enlightenment era itself such as Hobbes, Hume, and his contemporary Bentham, who Kant would have in mind while formulating his thesis. And his thesis directly or indirectly would be responding to theirs. Now, one of the main concerns of ethics, as you might have gleaned by now from the introduction to virtue ethics to consequentialism, right? We have done all that already. So, one of the main concerns of ethics is to understand how justification can be offered to categorize acts as moral or immoral, how general principles can be arrived at to justify our actions as good or bad or right or wrong. And also the concern has been to particularly understand the nature of such justifications or general principles. Deontological ethics in this sense identifies such justifications with duties, which is to say one ought to do X because the duty dictates so. Now, let us look at the etymological root of the term deontology here. And why do we do that? So, I personally think that doing so is often a valuable aid in discerning the conception which a label or a term has come to signify. Now, deontology, the term deontology, partly came from the word deont in Greek. Now, this word deont itself is a derived term from the term DEID, right? Now, deont means being needed or necessary. Now, this term necessary is gonna play a very significant role, right? And specifically, I would be discussing it in the next video, which too is on Kant. Now, the connotation, right, of necessary, right, is something that we identify with duty. Thus, deontology is the study of the nature of duty or the quest to understand duty. And deontological ethics or deontological theory in that sense is an effort to use duties as general principles to deductively infer or justify the ethical status of an act, where duties are considered to be principles that ought to be necessarily followed regardless of their consequences and therefore are inviolable. Now, please pay attention here to the term that I used here, regardless of their consequences. So, when you studied Mill's consequential ethics, what was the criteria of an action being right or wrong? If it was producing good consequences, consequences were the sole criteria. And here, consequences are absolutely redundant, right, in one way or the other. So, what you have to focus here is, so again, deontological ethics, consequential ethics, they both are going to, for that matter, virtue ethics as well, right? They both are giving you criteria. There, what was the criteria? Consequences were the criteria, right? If the consequences were of the kind that were producing maximum happiness for the maximum number of people, the action was to be termed as a good action. Here, on the other hand, right, it's our duty that is making an action to be right, which means if we are adhering to our duty, right, then we are acting ethically. Otherwise, we are not acting ethically. Now, speaking of deontological ethics, Kant is not the first one to have spoken of it. So, this duty-based ethics or deontological ethics has been there, right, from in the period of medieval philosophy as well. So, early medieval era and the later medieval era both. However, Kant's conception of the same, Kant's conception of the deontological ethics differed from how it was understood in the pre-Enlightenment era. particularly so in the medieval philosophy, which I was just talking about, right, where religion dominated almost all the spheres of human activity in the Western world. Now, the primary difference between the two, right, which is the duty-based ethics of Kant and then philosophies that were also again duty-based in the pre-Enlightenment era, the difference lies in the way they sought to arrive at such necessary principles. They sought to arrive at such duties that can be relied upon for justifying our actions, for justifying our deeds. Now, where does the difference lie really then? Now, in the pre-Enlightenment era, such principles were often decreed by religious authorities as divine commandments. Such imperatives assume legitimacy for being the commandments of an unquestionable authority, right? At times religious texts, God, right? Where humans assumed a passive role of mere unquestioning adherence with no room for human autonomy, free will and rationality that could have been exercised. For instance, look at the 10 Commandments, a set of biblical principles that we have. Now, they command you, for an instance, I'm not going to talk about all the 10 Commandments, taking just two or three of them. Now, they command you, say, to not to kill, to not to steal, to respect your parents, etc. Now, adhering to these commands is your duty, right? So, as given to you by the 10 Commandments, adhering to these commands is going to be your duty, and that is what makes your act moral. Not adhering then renders it immoral. Same is the case with so many other religions. So, for an instance, again, you may have encountered people amongst your own family, maybe some of you yourselves, and or maybe some of your friends, where for an instance, you or your family members, friends, whosoever your acquaintances are, right, they do charity, they practice sacrifices, they refrain from having alcohol, refrain from eating certain foods, consider, say, killing a particular animal to be immoral, as it is commanded by their religion or as it is commanded by God. So, what is the point that I am trying to make here is that your duty, right, under this framework is generally defined by religion or God. So, now when I am taking the example of charity here, you may confuse it that, you know, I do charity to help others, but I personally myself have seen many people in my own family, again, that's why I am talking about your family also, right. So, it's nothing like that I happen to be somebody different. So, in my family also I have seen people making charity because, you know, it is considered good in their religion. That would assure a place in heaven for them. If not assure, then at least it would add to their good deeds. So, and as a byproduct, you would be helping the other person also. So, they are not doing charity merely because they would be helping the other person. They are doing charity because their religion has commanded so, and they would be rewarded accordingly. And therefore, they are doing it. As a byproduct, the person is getting helped also. All right, so be it. That's even better, a cherry on the cake, right? And similarly regarding other things, and at times there is like a blind following of these rules also, right? So, anyways, what the crux is that the duty under this particular framework, right, where I am asking you to look at the people around you, where I am saying that people in the pre-Enlightenment era, right, they already were following duty-based ethics when I am speaking of 10 Commandments, right. So, duty under this framework is generally defined by religion or God, where again I am just reiterating human autonomy, rationality and free will did not have much role to play. Because it happens to be your duty, your religion has prescribed you to do that, you are doing that. However, saying that duty in the, say, pre-Enlightenment era or in the framework of religion, so saying that human autonomy, rationality, free will didn't have much role to play, it is not to say that it was an enterprise that was entirely devoid of justifications. Justifications were offered, and again I told you so when we were doing an introductory video, specifically in the period of Renaissance, right. So, justifications were offered, say by Aquinas, say by William of Ockham, right. But they were always invariably to prove or praise the merit of such imperatives or commandments, with hardly any intent to doubt their legitimacy. Now, such deontological ethical theories came to be clubbed under a common category termed as divine command theory. Some of the proponents of divine command theory may be St. Augustine from the early medieval period, and then William of Ockham from the later medieval period. Now, so this is about the deontological theory that were prevalent, right, in the pre-Enlightenment era. Now, Kant's deontological theory, because I am trying to tell you the difference between the two, right. So, Kant's deontological theory stands on a different foundation than the one we have just discussed. Now, again remember, the period in which Kant lived was the age of enlightenment, and it appears it had a profound impact on Kant's views when he conceptualized his version of deontological ethics. Although Kant was one figure who himself was influencing the culture of the time, but he also was influenced by the rest of the things that were happening, the sciences, the way they were developing, right, the prevalence of reason, the way things were coming out from the clutches of the religion. Now, Renaissance and the age of enlightenment, as again have been mentioned in the introduction as well, now are particularly known for bringing to the fore the conception of humanism, apart from rest of the other things that have been a part and parcel of that phase. Now, this conception of humanism presented humans as rational agents who were imbued with autonomy and rational faculty to exercise their free will judiciously. Thus, Kant sort of stood at kind of crossroads, where it dawned onto him that duty as understood under the divine command theory does not accord the human with a dignity that humankind deserves, right, because it was some way or the other denying rationality to humans, right. It was denying autonomy to humans. It was already giving you a set of duties and you had to follow it no matter what, right. Maybe your reasoning says otherwise, so be it, but then if it is your duty, right, you have to adhere to it in order to be on an ethical path. All right. Now, this preordained nature of duty, what I want to say here is that is this preordained nature of duty that is imposed by religion strips human of their autonomy and their capacity to reason. It undermines our rational faculty to configure a conception of good for ourselves. On the contrary, if the divine providence to provide us with imperatives or commandments is challenged, duties or the principles that necessarily are to be followed, it appears lose their legitimacy, making a lot of room for subjectivism. And in the absence of such principles, or given their perceived illegitimacy, how can acts be judged for their moral acceptance? So, when I am telling you that Kant sort of stood at the kind of crossroads, what is it that I am trying to tell you? So, religion was trying to bring some sort of objectivity, right, with the commands that it was giving. So, all the people who happen to belong to at least that religion, right, they had to adhere to those things. It was a command, it was a duty that they had to follow. So, it was giving some sort of objectivity, but then some way or the other it was stripping humans of their autonomy, right, stripping humans of their capacity to reasons, right. On the other hand, if we take away religion out of it from the domain of morality, not otherwise, right, religion has a lot of good things as well, and even for morality, religion has played a very, very crucial role, right, and it is not to be denied. Now, what I am trying to say here is that if you take away the divine commands, right, then what you are left with is a lot of subjectivity, right. There is room for a lot of subjectivity. Different people, different cultures may come up with different kinds of duties, different kinds of principles. So, there may be different set of principles that different set of people would be following, and the moment there is that kind of a state of affairs, somewhere or the other these principles do not have that legitimacy that one objective principle, one universal principle might have had, right? So if a command had to be universal, definitely the legitimacy would have been much more. Now if I already know that one culture is following it in this particular way, some other culture is not adhering to it, and it's okay to not adhere to it for that culture some way or the other, I may also falter. Alright, I may also think that maybe it's not necessary for me to adhere to that command. Now Kant had these two problems, right? So the issue before him was to understand, can human nature itself be relied upon to arrive at such principles or maxims that have to be necessarily followed to render an act morally acceptable. So what is it that he is trying to do? He wants to come up with a universal principle, right, an objective principle, a principle that has to be necessarily followed by everyone so that the legitimacy is also there. But along with that, he wants to rely upon human nature to arrive at such principles. So his version of deontological ethics is an effort of reconciliation in this particular sense, where the effort is to demonstrate that human as a rational agent is competent enough to arrive at principles or maxims that can be reliably employed to morally validate actions. So to demonstrate it, he relies on two key elements of human nature that, in his view, accord humans with a dignity that other existence such as animals or physical things cannot be accorded. Now, one of the, and why are we doing that? Because again we are saying that, can something be found in human nature on which we can rely to find such objective principles, such necessary principles? So Kant is now making efforts to find something in the human nature that can be so reliable that it can be a legislature of those necessary principles, those universal principles. Now one of such elements is interest or desire, meaning humans are beings with desires, interests or goals, right? We all have interests, we have certain interests. I have my interest in eating well, right? Living a healthy life, taking a proper sleep, and I do not have my interests in, say, generally being killed, or maybe me being exposed to harshest of the environments, extreme cold, extreme heat. All right. So, and similarly I have certain desires, I want to achieve certain things in my life, I have certain goals in my life. Now, if I want to state it alternatively, what is it that I am trying to say? So, humans are basically capable of value judgments based on which they can make decisions to satisfy such desires or interests. On the other hand, things or objects, for all we know thus far, don't exhibit any interests or desire. So, for an instance, if I talk about this phone, all right, now if I drop it from here on this table or maybe on the ground, right, and it just shatters into pieces. Now, do you think that interests of this phone would be hampered in any particular fashion? That it had any desires that now it would not be able to fulfill? Do we think that it had certain goals that it wanted to achieve? No, not really. Regarding objects, we do not talk in that particular fashion. We do not say that a phone had an interest. Of course, me as the owner of this phone, right, maybe my interests are hampered, and in one way or the other, right. So, for an instance, if it was a brand new phone, an expensive phone, and I did not want it to have been damaged, then perhaps my interests are hampered in a negative way. But for an instance, if it was an old phone, maybe I was about to get a new one and I was not getting a new one because this was still working fine. So maybe my interests are enhanced in certain ways. My point here is that this phone, these objects do not have interests, goals or desires. Me as an owner of the phone, I happen to be now a subject. I am a human being to whom this phone belongs. Right? Now, my interest may be hampered. Now, regarding objects, we can say the same thing. We can say it, right? Now, Kant believed the same regarding the animals as well. For him, just like objects, just like this phone, right? Just like this camera in front of me, right? Animals didn't have interests or goals either. Now, maybe it is a bit of digression here, but perhaps same cannot be said about the animals. Of course, there are many living beings that do behave dispositionally and undoubtedly so, but animals bestowed with some degree of higher order cognition, such as most of the mammals, they do demonstrate good degree of evident, motivated or goal-directed behavior, right? We can't really say that they have no interests. The thing that I'm trying to tell you here is that to him, they acted only dispositionally or instinctively at best. So, they were not to be treated as beings who had interests. Although this is not to say that he sanctioned animal cruelty, he didn't do that. But this was not because they have any intrinsic worth or dignity, but that was so because such acts may inspire people to resort to do the same against fellow humans. Now, therefore, to him, only humans have desires and interests, contributing to their intrinsic worth or dignity that should be respected. An important point here. Alright, so why these desires are important, why these interests are important? Because they make you somebody who is intrinsically worthy, somebody who has dignity, and that dignity has to be respected. Now, as mentioned earlier, I was telling you that there are two key elements of human nature, right? That in his view accord human the dignity or the intrinsic worth that other existence are not accorded with. Now, one has been explained to you already, which is what? That to have desires or interests. The other essential element in the context is human being as a rational agent. Now, what do we mean by rational agent really here? The term rational agent represents again two aspects of what makes us a human in Kant's estimation. One is to be an autonomous agent who is also capable of exercising free will, and the other one is to exercise such a will rationally, relying on reasons. So, a rational agent is free to make its own decisions, set its own goals, and guide its own conduct by reason. Now, these two elements of human nature, that is, to have desires, interests, and goals, and to be a rational agent, are central to Kant's version of deontological ethics. Now, let us see how are they so very important. Now, deontological ethics in general, again as explained earlier to you, is concerned with what? Identifying the duty, identifying the necessary principle that can be relied on for justifying acts, justifying your deeds. Now, in Kant's view, human has the capacity to arrive at such necessary principles provided they act and seek justifications for them as a rational agent, rather than as a pursuant of interests or desires. And the question to be pondered here is, why did Kant think so? Well, as emphasized thus far, humans are autonomous agents for Kant and they possess free will. This free will, it appears, can be exercised in two ways. One of the ways is to make choices and act in a way to satisfy desires or interests, one of the earlier stated key elements of human nature. And the alternate way is, which is very, very important here, to exercise free will as a rational agent, which is the other stated element of the human nature. So, remember this particular thing. Alright, now I am touching upon a related concept. So, Kant also argues that a moral theory should have its basis in what is termed as an unconditional good, meaning an act's status of being good cannot be contingent on conditions. He also argues that the only unconditional good for a rational being is to act with a goodwill. Again, a very, very important concept for Kant, right? The concept of goodwill. Now, what is this goodwill here? So, to act with goodwill would mean to determine what ought to be done and act with a sense of duty. So, for an instance, what we want to say here is that, or what Kant would like to say here is that I should help because to do so is my duty. And to help for any other considerations, however altruistic those considerations may be, is not to be termed as an ethical action. So, what would be an ethical action here? An ethical action would be if it is arriving from the sense of duty. Now, Kant emphasizes that it's only in one's capacity as a rational agent that one can arrive at such necessary principles or duties to justify acts. And why did Kant believe so? Well, again, as a rational agent, one relies on reasons to support judgments or act in a particular way, and such reasons are binding for everyone at all times, which means no exceptions are permitted to the rule. No special cases can be identified. No rational person will ever deny it. Kant termed such principles or maxims as categorical imperative. Another very, very important concept in Kantian ethics, that is of categorical imperative. So, what is a categorical imperative? So, first of all, imperative is to be understood as a command, right? So, it is a command the way it was when you were, so when I just told you the divine command theory, and there was a command to not to lie, to not to steal, they were commands, right? So, this too is a command, but it is a categorical command. What do we mean by a categorical command? A command that is absolutely unconditional, right? Again, the way all this that I just said a while ago, that no special cases can be identified, no exceptions can be admitted to the particular imperative that we are talking about. All right. So, these categorical imperatives, right, are the one which would be finally the source of duty for Kantian ethics. So, now here they both are duty-based ethics, both meaning Kant's deontological ethics, right, and the divine command theory, for an instance. They both are deontological ethics, and I told you just a while ago that there is a difference between the two. Okay, so now what is the difference between the two? In divine command theory, what was the source of duty? The source of duty was maybe religious scriptures, maybe God, right? In Kant's deontological ethics, the source of duty is this categorical imperative. So, what is it that I have to do? If I have to act ethically, I have to fulfill my duty. I have to adhere to my duty. Now, what is my duty? My duty would be given to me by the categorical imperative, right? Where no exceptions are to be permitted to the rule, right? No special cases are to be identified again, right? So, for an instance, one should not lie, right? So, it's an imperative, and for Kant, it is a categorical imperative, right? That one shouldn't lie in any circumstances, whatever may be the case, whatever may be the conditions, whatever good consequences it may bring. And similarly, killing is unacceptable. All right. So, in whatever situation you happen to be, if you happen to find yourself in a situation where you have to kill someone, right, for maybe some other good, but it is your duty to not to kill, and it would remain unacceptable. So, no exceptions are to be accepted here. The point here that we are trying to make is that these imperatives happen to be categorical. So, to better appreciate it, Kant contrasted it with hypothetical imperatives. Now, what are hypothetical imperatives? They are the commands that are conditional. So, what were categorical imperatives? That were commands that were unconditional, and they are hypothetical imperatives. That means they accept of conditions as well. All right. So, that is, so if certain conditions are satisfied, certain principles can be followed. In other words, such commands or principles satisfy our desires or interests. If I desire X, then I may do Y, right? Now, one of the key elements of human nature according to Kant, it was, right, desire or interest. Now, it tells us what ought to be done to fulfill our specific interest in question. So, for an instance, if I want to control climate change, I should use green technology. So, using green technology may not have an intrinsic value in itself, but I have to do it. Why? Because if I have to control climate change. So, if climate was not getting impacted by we using carbon products as a fuel, then perhaps using green technology was of no purpose. So, here using green technology is fulfilling one of the goals, right? So, if I desire to control climate change, if I intend to control climate change, I may use green technology. Now similarly, another example could be exercise, like physical exercise I'm talking about. So exercise if you want to be healthy. So if you do not want to be healthy, you may choose not to exercise. You may absolutely live a sedentary lifestyle. Many people do that, right? But if you want to live a healthy lifestyle, then exercise. Similarly, another example, so practice regularly to be a good player. Alright, and similarly you can find many other examples in your own lives where you say go to the college, you want to go for higher studies, or maybe you want to earn better, you want to earn a name for yourself, you are a curious person, whatever is the reason for you to go to the college, or maybe whatever is the reason for you to enroll for this particular course. Alright, so it was not like a duty for you, moral duty for you to do this particular course. If you had to achieve some purposes, you had to achieve some goals, and therefore you enrolled in this particular course. Now these examples that I have given, right, that using green technology if you want to control climate, exercising if you want to be healthy, practicing regularly if you want to be a good player, enrolling in this particular course because you wanted to learn about certain ethical theories, or whatever your reasons may be for the same. Now take a careful note of how these principles, how these imperatives, how these commands differ from the categorical imperative, differ from the unconditional commands. What was their nature? They were not admitting of any condition. They were not saying that one should not lie if X, Y, Z. They were not saying that killing is unacceptable in, say, X, Y, Z circumstances, right? Lying is always wrong. So it's just a one command, right? Do X. One should not lie, or do not do X in this particular case, right? So now that happens to be the difference between the two. Now looking at the difference between the two, right, of categorical imperative and hypothetical imperative, moral considerations are categorical imperatives that do not look to satisfy interests or desires. Categorical imperatives are oughts. They are derived from principles that every rational person must accept. Now, to recapitulate what we have done so far is, so what has been explained to you is how an autonomous rational agent taking recourse of the reason exercises its free will to arrive at principles that can be universally relied on without exceptions to justify acts. Now, the next lecture will exclusively focus on Kant's formulation of categorical imperatives. So Kant has given various formulations of these categorical imperatives, right? That would be the focus of the next lecture, and along with giving you the formulations of all those imperatives, some of the significant challenges to the Kant's deontological ethical theory would also be looked at. Now, to test your understanding and track your progress, I am giving you here a list of some key questions that you may attempt to answer. So, first question is, what is deontological ethics in general and how Kant's version of it differs from the rest? Now, next question is, what aspect of human nature, according to Kant, is central to construct a moral theory? Now, the next question, you have to explain the Kant's conception of unconditional good. So you have to link it with the conception of goodwill. Next question is, I want you to elucidate categorical imperative and how it is contrasted with hypothetical imperative. So we have not yet reached to the formulation of categorical imperative, but then you have an idea regarding what categorical imperative in itself is, right? So you have to tell what categorical imperative is and how it can be contrasted with the hypothetical imperative. Now, next question, which is your last question basically, is that having interests or desires and being a rational agent are two inalienable aspects of human nature for Kant, yet they take us on different paths in exercise of our free will. I want you to elucidate on this particular aspect a bit. That's all. Thank you very much.